Today we have everybody's favorite internet woodworker and master jig maker, and my boss, Stumpy Nubs.
This better not be one of those gotcha interviews.
No, we're going to just talk about your new box joint jig. So, new box joint jig? Why?
Well, I think the real question is the perfect jig out there? And if it is, don't we owe it to ourselves and the woodworking community to continue to develop our jigs as we try to make a better mousetrap?
No, that's not the question because I didn't ask that question. Permission to treat the witness as hostile?
Who are you talking to?
I'm conducting this interview and I want to know the answer to my question. Why?
Look, don't get me wrong. I do like the old box joint jig. I designed it a couple years ago and hundreds of people have actually built it from my plans. But there were a few things that I just wasn't quite satisfied with, and I guess the bottom line is I thought I could do better.
So let's start there. Name some features of your old jig that you didn't like and how you improved upon them.
Well, first of all, I didn't like the crank. That old jig had a carriage that moved on a lead screw, and to move that carriage from one cut to the next, you had to spin a crank, which made my wrist kind of tired.
So you eliminated the crank?
Yep, got rid of it. The crank, the lead screw, the carriage, everything.
No carriage?
Well, the moving carriage, I thought added too much bulk. I mean, it's still a great idea. And it's not even my idea. As far as I know, the first person who used a moving carriage on a box joint jig was Matthias at Wood Gears up in Canada. The benefit to a carriage is the workpiece moves without having to pick it up and reposition it for each cut on a finger, like a lot of the traditional jigs have.
What's wrong with that? It worked for billions of years.
No, I didn't say the traditional jigs with the little fingers didn't work. I'm saying that they're prone to error if you're not careful. If you're cutting along real fast, it's easy to set down the workpiece incorrectly, mess up the cut, especially if you're getting sawdust buildup on the finger.
And the carriage eliminates that error?
Yes, because once you clamp the workpiece to the jig, it never moves away from the carriage. They stay perpendicular to the table through the entire process. And it makes it a lot easier to cut multiple pieces at one time.
So if the carriage is better, why change it?
I already told you. Is this thing on?
It was too bulky.
For my taste, yes. Like I said, you have to turn the crank to move it along the lead screw, which I found tiring, especially if you're making a lot of cuts. I tried to make it a little better by adding a quick release to the original jig, which was nice because you didn't have to crank it all the way back, but you still have to do some cranking during the actual cut making process.
So the new jig has no carriage, no lead screw?
No, not in the sense that the first one did. There's still a sort of carriage that holds your workpieces, but it's much smaller and it operates differently. Instead of turning a lead screw with a crank to move the carriage, it slides freely by hand. So you can adjust it much more quickly and return it to the starting position just as fast.
So if you're adjusting by hand, how do you accurately set your spacing?
Well, that's where the old lead screw principle comes back in. I moved it up to the top of the jig and I changed the way it works. In fact, I wouldn't even call it a lead screw anymore because it doesn't turn. We just are using the evenly spaced threads to lock our fence into position.
Oh, I don't understand.
Well, it is some complex space age technology we're talking about here.
Like Buck Rogers?
More like Incra. Incra's jigs use interlocking teeth to guarantee precise positioning every time. I'm using the same principle on my new box joint machine. You move the carriage by hand, and when you get the cursor to the position you want, you engage the lock, which has matching threads on it. When those threads come together, they correct for the tiniest of error. So if your cursor is a few thousandths of an inch off the mark because your mustache got in the way, or maybe your eyes aren't as good as they used to be, those interlocking threads automatically correct for that error and line it right up perfectly every time. And this new system eliminates the need for math.
Math is hard.
I know it is. So I made some paper templates that slip underneath the shield on the fence. On it are the common layouts for box joints, 1/8, 1/4, all the way up to an inch. By moving the carriage from one line to the next, you're cutting evenly spaced and sized fingers because every time the lock engages, it corrects for those errors like I mentioned.
Now, if you were a tree, what kind of tree would you be?
What?
Barbara Walters asked that when she interviewed the president. I thought that I'd try it out on you. Well, that about wraps it up. Thanks for telling us about
Settle down there, fuzzy lip. I'm not done just yet. Because this type of carriage gives you freedom of movement, you can alter your finger spacing for some pretty cool looking joints. The traditional style jig can't do this at all. And the jig that I made before can, but it required a lot of math to do, and like you said, math is hard.
Yes, I did.
And not only can you alter your spacing, but you can make fancy inlaid joints by double cutting your fingers. There's only a couple of box joint jigs on the commercial market that can do that, and they're really expensive.
So in summary, this jig is better than the other jig you made because?
Well, it's less bulky. There's no crank, so it's more comfortable and I think faster to adjust. It self-corrects for error, and the templates make even complex joint layouts fast and easy.
How hard was it to make?
It took me a while to design it and test it, but once I had it perfected, the actual build only took a few hours.
And if I want to make one?
Well, I just gave away all the secrets, so that work's already done for you. If you don't want to try to design it yourself, though, you can pick up a set of plans over at stumpynubs.com, where I have all the diagrams for cutting, the parts lists, photos, the works. And buying one of those also helps us out, because that's how we're able to finance all these jigs and woodworking goodness that we do.
Well, thank you for sitting down with me today, Mr. Nubs. It has been a real pleasure.
My pleasure.
Next time, we'll be visiting with a guy who claims to have proof that Norm Abram was kidnapped and probed by a race of woodworking space aliens. Until then, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and visit stumpynubs.com for loads of woodworking videos, tricks, reviews, and some sweet, sweet entertainment.